Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Emma and I'm here to do my April wrap up. So April was an interesting month. I just also made myself some hibiscus lemonade. It's really easy. You just brew some hibiscus tea and then I cool it and throw in a few lemon slices and it's so good. Quenching. So April was an interesting month. I started off the month with what I thought was going to be my favorite book. But like in the last week, some other book came in and just completely usurped the first book I read this month for a 5-star read. In terms of life, I'm sure April has been quite cruel to everyone out there. T.S. Eliot is correct. I'm sure in our personal lives we have hopefully all just been doing the same thing, which is stay at home as much as possible and just find ways to entertain oneself. There's also so many of you guys here now, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here, and thank you for just being here and supporting my channel, so thank you. With that being said, let's get into some statistics. So I read 9 books over 3,328 pages, and I had 3 3-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, 3 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read, which is pretty good, honestly. So let's talk about books because you guys know how much I like to ramble on. So the first book I read in April was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This copy is falling apart. There's so many sections that if I just like kind of loosely let go, they'll just completely come out of the book, which is kind of what this book did to me, and it's kind of what, if you've read Charles Dickens, he will do to you. He just like comes literally himself out of the page towards you to shake your hand and to introduce you into so much whimsy and magic and just fantasy that classics up until Charles Dickens at one of the earliest points, no one had seen that yet. No one had witnessed that, but Charles Dickens just invites you so much to witness that with him, and his craft of character is remarkable. If you can't tell, I adored this book completely. I gave it 4 stars. It was my first Dickens book as well, which was quite magical, and I'm so just really grateful that I also get to go on this kind of weird Dickens journey with Carolyn, because she's currently reading Great Expectations. I think she's finishing it up right now as I'm talking, so that is just incredibly exciting. This was amazing. I jumped into Great Expectations without any idea of what the plot was about or what it had in store. I knew nothing of what occurred within this book. And there's this very specific feeling that happens when you consider a book. For example, when I considered Great Expectations, you have all of these kind of preliminary ideas in your mind before you actually start that book, whatever those ideas might be, and they're just kind of construed from this body of ideas and literature and words that the human race has constructed for you. And it's a very special feeling to start a book and finish a book and realize that you have now been acquainted with what exactly was in between its covers when before you were previously blind. And you can just kind of compare those two experiences with what you thought was going to be in that book before you actually read it versus the magic that you know to be in it now. So that was just completely incredible. If you've never read Great Expectations, do so. My mom is actually reading it right now, which is why this little bookmark of an owl is in it. So I'm just so happy that so many people around me are choosing to pick up this book because it was phenomenal. If you don't know, we are following Pip, who is an orphan. He is brought up by his sister, and he lives with his sister and his sister's husband Joe, who's one of his best friends, who works in a forge and is very much symbolic, a little bit, I want to say, kind of not really autobiographical of Charles Dickens, but he's definitely infused with so much nature and a little bit of just antiquity and pastoralism and the good, honest, hardworking man that Charles Dickens obviously portrays him so faithfully to be. However, one day a convict escapes and Pip unfortunately meets him in a graveyard. It's how this book opens, of course, and he gives the convict bread and water and eventually gives him the tools to free himself. And it's just incredibly, remarkably cool because then years later, Pip, who has kind of gotten a little smattering of what it is like to be a gentleman and what that society, high society, and what that high life is like after visiting this old, creepy, melancholy lady named Mrs. Havisham and her daughter, figure, her kind of fugitive daughter figure, Estella, who is actually my favorite character in this whole book. He gets a glimpse of what that society is like, and then he is offered a chance to become a gentleman via a mysterious, anonymous benefactor. So he is brought into the throes of London society and kind of has to navigate this new world, while at the same time being ignorant of the source of that which permits him entrance into that world, which was quite cool. I just adored this. More than anything, the plot was spectacular, but the writing, Dickens' writing, having never experienced it myself before, it was just such a treat and incredible. It was like eating, it was like eating one of those candies that melts and melts in your mouth as you get closer to the center, and you know there's going to be something even sweeter and even more kind of decadent and delectable at the core. I really don't know what this metaphor is, but I think it's a suitable one for Dickens because it was just so full of the fantasy and mixed equal parts horror and humor. That's the other thing. This book was incredibly funny. I found myself nose exhaling more often than not at some of Dickens' lines, and especially at the most inopportune moments. There is this fabulous debate that I mentioned in one of my vlogs. You've probably seen this debate or heard of it or whatnot. It's called Dickens versus Tolstoy, the Battle of the Great 19th Century Novelists. And within that, they debate and argue and contest for which is better. But there's some scenes performed from Great Expectations which are just absolutely superb. And one of the professors talks about Great Expectations and Dickens in more of an extended way, I suppose, and it was just amazing and such a great compliment to have after reading this book. So I loved all of the such like melancholy and dark and creepy and really ancient horror, and I just loved that so much. I had no idea how creepy and how much creep factor this book actually carried within it, so that was another thing I really enjoyed. You guys know I love dark books, and to see a little bit of the dark and the fantastic mixed together was amazing. So I'm gonna stop rambling about this. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend if you haven't read Dickens. I have just ordered A Tale of Two Cities, and I think I would like to order myself a really nice copy of this book because it's falling apart. And I've recently fallen in love with the the Penguin English Library Edition, sorry. So I think I would like to order a different copy of that because I'm gonna read it again and again. So this was just amazing. 4 stars. Ah, so good. The next book I read in April was Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This is an adult sci-fi, and I gave this 3.5 stars. So this was quite a cool concept for a sci-fi book. I adore sci-fi so much, unbelievably so much, and I was really excited to read more sci-fi. So this book opens with the discovery of a huge metal hand that's been discovered in the dirt in, oh goodness, it might be Utah. Might be Arizona. I don't think it's Arizona. Might be Ohio. Utah? Ohio? Some US state. By this girl who's 11 years old, and years later she is now one of the leading physicists who is tasked with taking charge of this project that is researching the origins and the properties and the pieces of this metal huge hand, because some mysterious force, who we don't really know who it is, has contacted her from some strange secret program that may or may not be related to the government. We just don't really know, and they're trying to find the rest of the hand since they think that it's part of this huge giant, this huge sleeping giant or robot. This whole book is set in an interview format, and it was quite interesting. I did enjoy it. However, my only kind of queries were that a lot of the things that happened in here weren't believable, and it wasn't the science fiction elements at all, which is a strange complaint to have for a sci-fi book. It was just the contemporary way, the way that people acted in here, especially people who were so intelligent. We bring in this insane graduate student linguist, we bring in these 2 amazing prodigy military helicopter pilots, and we bring in this insane geneticist, but all the while these people aren't really acting to the level of intelligence that their position suggests. And I don't mean such in like an emotional, intelligent way, because that's understandable. We all have our emotional ranges, some of us longer than a teaspoon, but just the scientific things and the logical things that these people would take on and these people would do and the mistakes they would make. It was very hard to believe that. It was not hard to believe the sci-fi. I thought the science fiction was quite well done. Really, really enjoyed it. This book also got quite political very quickly, as every discovery tends to do. Everything is political, I guess, but this book just really, really dealt with some huge issues, really touchy issues, and the relationships between countries and the relationships between people, and what our place really is in the world as humans. And I am so excited. I really, really want to read the next 2 books in the series. I think I'll be picking those up pretty soon because I did just really like it. So yeah, I would really recommend Sleeping Giants if you guys want like a new cool sci-fi. Really, really awesome. Plus, there is some French-Canadian Quebecois representation, which I just love because I feel like whenever I read a book, there's like, I don't think I've ever read a book with French-Canadian characters in it that I wasn't forced to read for like school French, you know what I mean? Yeah, so that was awesome. Vincent was definitely my favorite character in here because he was just awesome. Alright, and then we read a book of which genre you'll be very surprised to hear because it was a contemporary romance. I usually stay much, much further than like 6 feet away from contemporary romances, but I'd heard so much about The Hayden Game by Sally Thorne from one of my best friends, and she knows me really well and she thought that I would enjoy it, and she was quite right. So The Hayden Game is a contemporary romance. We're following obviously our 2 main love protagonists, Lucy and Joshua. They both work at a publishing company and they are both the assistants of the 2 CEOs of this publishing company, since the company has merged in order to save their respective sides. And they sit across from each other at their office desks every single day and they hate each other so intensely, so vehemently. They just loathe the other, and it was so fun to watch. It was such a wonderful romance book because I can't take the contemporary fad and the contemporary trends and like the really just mushy gushy fluffy boring books. But this one was just so interesting because it took a kind of hate to love relationship to the utmost extreme. Like they are just plain mean to one another, like vicious, to the point where they like break down and they cry. There's some really big mental health issues in here. This book dealt with a lot of other issues too, namely some academic pressure issues. That was really, really interesting, specifically through the lens of like a medical school degree dropout kind of situation, which was cool. And more than that, it was just heckin' cute. It was so cute. Oh my gosh, it was so cute. I giggled reading this book. I giggled, and it was just so wholesome and so amazing. I know they're making it into a movie, which you bet your bunnies I'm gonna watch. Like it was really, really good. I enjoyed it. It's a very addictive read. There were some parts plot-wise that I'm like, what is going on? Like it didn't really fall into kind of a really highly understandable human emotion kind of range, which was interesting. I'm not going to further examine it because I just want it to kind of exist here and be the way it is for me, and just be kind of this book that I know I'm going to reread because it was just so highly enjoyable, so highly entertaining, and so freaking cute. So, I do always have to critique at least one element of a book though, because I feel like obviously there's always something you can say that should be built upon and should be, you know, liable and should be out there and should be honed for consideration. With The Hayden Game, this was just the insane grip on male tropes and male standards and male stereotypes and male sexuality and male physique and everything. I just felt like so icky at certain parts reading this book because it was just like really shoved in your face over and over again. That's the thing too, like it was a very repetitive tropism that was being employed, and it was just one that's like, it's not a useful way to create desire. It's not a useful way to create this attachment that you want your reader to feel. It's just a way of really blockading them and barricading them for feeling what you think your main protagonist is feeling for her main love interest, in this case, Joshua. You can create with words this like highly valuable atmosphere of love or desire or infatuation or whatever you as a romance author are trying to create, but you do not need to do so while at the same time putting down lesser kind of physiques or physical appearances or aesthetics. Like it's just this very bad binary system, and unfortunately Sally Thorne fell just right into it, which was so disappointing. I felt very bad reading this book for like anyone who doesn't look like the 6'4" insanely Hercules-esque Joshua Templeman. Like, it's just an absolutely ridiculous stereotype, and one that frankly needs to be done away with, because it's just not progressive, it's just not useful. It doesn't need to exist in order to create this cute, fun book. Do you know what I mean? I'm really going off on this, but like, it really bugged me. And I'm not really here to overanalyze these contemporary romances, because I know at the surface level, when you try to plunge deeper, they will definitely start to shard and break away into just and kind of resurface back to their surface level, because that's where they exist at. But I'm just saying that, like, this doesn't need to keep happening, kind of thing. Our main character, Lucy, is allowed to be so wonderfully weird. She is such a wacko. She's so strange. She has a Smurf collection. She was raised on a strawberry farm. She's 5 foot, and she's just allowed this kind of, this freedom that unfortunately her counterpart is just boxed in, and it's what he's used to create appeal for. And it's just like, yes, he has a wonderful personality. Yes, he's a great guy, but he doesn't need to be equipped with these impossibilities of figure and form. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I don't think any of this made sense. Maybe a little bit of it did, but regardless, I gave it 3.5 stars. I would recommend. Anyway, super cute, super great, but those little lines of just kind of tapping incessantly at that code, at that structure that's been set up, and not like doing anything to veer off that path or go over that obstacle or anything like that, and just to kind of write it into your book again and again. It bugged me. It bugged me. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about it. Alright, speaking of women and men and gender and everything like that, the next book I read was also amazing and dealt with these issues in a very wonderful way, and a very brutal, blinding, wonderful way. And that book is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This was gifted to me by Carolyn. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I actually got to buddy read it with some of my favorite people who exist on this planet, namely Carolyn, Kira, Mary, and Lucy. Thank you guys so much for buddy reading this with me. I had an absolute blast with you. There's going to be something coming very soon with this book. So The Silence of the Girls is a retelling of the Iliad from the point of view of Briseis, who becomes the slave of Achilles and who starts this whole conflict that leads to Achilles withdrawing from the Trojan War. I have vlogs where I discuss everything basically in this book because it took me a while to read it, but in the end I gave it 4 stars. Throughout this whole read, I was really kind of, I don't know, just searching for Briseis' tale and really searching for this kind of story of the woman and this loudness and this volume that I thought this book was going to be about. But that whole kind of search was just, it was looking in all the wrong places, because this book is called The Silence of the Girls. And I think the way I was going about trying to read this book was just completely wrong, and it wasn't until I really got to the last 20 pages, and then especially the last page, that I was like, okay, that's what this is doing. This is very clever, very subtle, a very small reclaiming and a very small retelling. But at the same time, I'm not sure what I expected, because there's nothing much that can be possible for Briseis and for Pat Barker writing Briseis and all the other wonderful women who appear in here, because they are so limited in the Iliad. They exist in this very, very tight margin that, unfortunately, realistically, if you are a classicist, if you are a historian, if you are a writer, an author, or a pursuer of truth, you can't really widen realistically without doing like insane things that aren't real. So, first sentence in here is really, is good. Great Achilles, brilliant Achilles, shining Achilles, godlike Achilles. How the epithets pile up. We never called him any of those things. We called him the Butcher. More than anything else, more than brilliance, more than greatness, his speed defined him. There's a story that he once chased the god Apollo all over the plains of Troy. Cornered at last, Apollo is supposed to have said, "You can't kill me. I'm immortal." "Ah, yes," Achilles replied, "but we both know if you weren't immortal, you'd be dead." Nobody was ever allowed the last word. Not even a god. This book is mostly narrated from the point of view of Briseis, and it's just so brutal with the way it depicts the war and the women and the men, but it's just so mundane in its brutality, which is what is the most brutal of all. Briseis depicts and tells us these things and speaks to us with this just like deadpan, flat wasteland reality in which she and all the other women who are entrapped in the Greek encampments exist and live in, and just the slaughter and the rape and the violence and the assault and the destitution that is forced upon them is just presented to you with a very kind of, it's just there. It's just in front of you. It's a very hard-hitting book. There's every single trigger warning ever in here, so just be wary or cautious of that or whatever you need. But this book was really, really amazing in the end. It lets you know exactly what they went through, exactly what their lives were like. And I was over here just kind of, I don't know, I feel a little bit selfish about it now. I was expecting the story of her life, or the story of what she did after the war was over, or what kind of happened, but really, like, when this huge trauma occurs and you yourself, literally from the first page of the Iliad, you are implicated as part of the cause of that trauma, you just become that trauma. And so Briseis can never really exist anywhere except in the Iliad. That is what her life will always be redirected to, rerouted to, will be existing as the cause. Because the first page of this book opens with a quote that asks, do you know how European literature begins? And the answer is that it begins with a brawl that breaks out over a girl, a kidnapped girl in a war, and that is obviously Briseis. And it's completely true. She can't walk out of this story. She can't leave it. Pat Barker knows that she's so tied to this narrative of silence for her as a person and as an object, that this is the only story that she can tell. And this is really great too. I'd recommend, if you haven't read the Iliad or if you have read the Iliad, either way, this is phenomenal. Alrighty, and then I read a very average fantasy. It is Eragon by Christopher Paolini. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about it just because I feel like there's really not a lot to realistically talk about with it. So Eragon is a pretty popular middle grade fantasy. It got turned into a movie. It was kind of in the spotlight for a number of years when I was growing up, at least. So I decided to give it a go because I saw it on Libby. And guys, I was really disappointed. I still gave it 3 stars because the writing was really, really nice, and the kind of structure of it, and even just like the events that went on here were fine, but the plot was unbelievably slow moving, unbelievably boring. I really don't see how any kid could kind of get through this because I really struggled. It's quite a long book. This whole book just kind of felt like traveling. Eragon was constantly on the road. Eragon is a 15-year-old boy, I believe, and he finds this dragon egg. This isn't really a spoiler because it's literally it's not a spoiler. And the dragon hatches. He names her Zafira, and he talks to her. There's talking dragons, which is great. Prior to the Orange Tree did it better though. And then, as usual, he sets off on a quest, there's the bad forces, blah blah blah. I don't really want to do this book injustice, but it really wasn't that great. I don't think I'll be continuing on with the series. It did not wow me at all. I was just really bored with it. Honestly, it felt like a plot that had been done 1,000 million times. I feel like so much inspiration, maybe a little too much, was taken from Lord of the Rings in here. Next, I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I do have to say, first of all, that this is probably my least favorite Jane Austen book I've read. I'm not saying it was bad at all. Jane Austen is still the master, still the wonderful crafter of English literature. It was great. I gave it 3 stars. I found it a little bit boring, I'm not gonna lie. I'm obviously still saying that every single construction, every single line that Jane Austen writes is great and is a gift to English literature, and what she invents and what she creates and pulls from her mind is wondrous. However, just personally, very subjectively, I just found it quite boring. It is just your typical comedy of errors in which people fall in love, people fall out of love, people fall in love with money, people fall out of love with their money. It just really didn't keep my interest because typically I don't like reading about those things. That's why I don't really enjoy contemporary as a genre, usually. At least not kind of really English contemporary literature. Obviously this isn't contemporary. I found myself not caring, not getting attached to any single one of these characters. I found most of these characters unbearably annoying, which I know is the point for a certain number of them, but even the ones that are supposed to be some of our main protagonists, I just really couldn't take. I enjoyed certain parts of it. Okay, I feel like some books I pour my heart out for 10 minutes over, and some books I'm just like, I read this book. Here she is. Let's move on. Alright, I only read one YA this month, and that was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I picked this up because Steve West narrates it. That was like my number one reason for picking it up. But then I read the synopsis and I realized that it's said to have been inspired a little bit by ancient Rome, which really, really hooked me, obviously, as a classical studies student and just as someone who enjoys ancient Rome. Come on. So An Ember in the Ashes is set in this, it's a fantasy. And this empire is ruled obviously by the emperor, and then there are these soldiers, these masks who wear these silver masks, and I guess they're supposed to mimic the centurions and the kind of cutthroat nature of a Roman soldier's upbringing and the relationships between the patrician elite, which were really well displayed, I'm not gonna lie. So I guess I kind of thought this was going to be a really interesting storyline, and I definitely enjoyed how many characters or cast of characters that we're presented with. There's quite a number of them. Mainly we're following Laia, who is not one of the upper class, she's one of the lower class, the scholar class cast, and her family has basically just been decimated by the masks. And one day when they come to take her brother away to prison, she has to team up with the resistance in order to get him back. So she is sent on this secret spy mission to go stay at the house and become a slave to the leader actually of the army. And then she's in very close proximity to our second character, who is Elias, who is one of the soldiers, and he is in his final year, just about to graduate from the kind of army school place. Unfortunately, this book became kind of just really entangled with love. At first it kind of became entangled in a way that wasn't super average and kind of normal for a YA book to do, but throughout the book it did really disappoint me, and it just kind of fell into all of the same tropes again, which like I don't need 100 times over. I was really expecting more out of this book. I'm not saying it was a bad book by any means, but it definitely just left me like, it left me with nothing really. I read it and I finished it and it just kind of passed through me like really bad Chinese food. I can't believe I just described a book that way. Oh, I'm so sorry. It really wasn't that bad. It provided me exactly with the entertainment that I wanted. Not really, actually. What am I saying? It didn't actually. Guys, it really wasn't that good. That's what I like about these kind of reviews, because I kind of get to discover as I'm talking and as I'm like thinking about the books and feeling the words through me, how I really honestly feel about these books. And An Ember in the Ashes disappointed. It disappointed. I did not like our main character Laia at all. I felt like she had absolutely zero personality. She was just like a little slug crawling along the floor of this book, while literally next to her and next to Elias, his best friend, Helene. Am I right? I know this book is super popular, but I had somehow never heard of it until I picked it up, until I saw it as audiobooks produced and narrated by Steve West. And I know so many people have read it because I creeped everyone's Goodreads. But, Helene though. Helene. How can Elias even consider Laia when Helene is, she's right there. She's right there. She's literally right there. And she is so complex, so built, so cunning, so just, she's so interesting. She is infinitely interesting. I don't know why I got so obsessed with Helene. Even Elias too. Elias was a pretty good character. I really like Elias. But Laia and Keenan, I just don't care about them. I just don't care. If you've read this book, please feel free to come chat with me about it, because I don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I know the series is a pretty long one by now and it's still going, so that's interesting. But Helene was like the saving grace of this book. I just found her character so interesting. I found her motivation so interesting. I found her to be a really big mystery that isn't fully explained, whereas Laia was just kind of cut, paste, here are her reasons for doing this. She's a very flat character and that's it. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about An Ember in the Ashes, but overall I enjoyed it. But it definitely disappointed, and it obviously kind of fell into all the tropes that kind of just gush out year after year and book after book of young adult, and I'm sick of it. So there. Alright, this next book that I read was my 5-star read of the month. I am obsessed with it. Oh my gosh, I am blown away. This is the kind of work that humans are on this earth to create, and this is the kind of work that humans are on this earth to also recreate and reform and rescue, and that is exactly what Anne Carson did with If Not Winter. Fragments of Sappho. I rave about Anne Carson pretty frequently on this channel, but if you've never heard of her, this beautiful person. She is a classicist, she is a poet, she is so intelligent. I just aspire, she is such an inspiration. I believe she's Canadian as well. So this is a collection of Sappho's fragments of pieces of papyrus that have ripped or curled away or torn and have been redacted, and that Anne Carson has put back into the world, has translated her book right here, If Not Winter, of new translations of Sappho's Fragments. So beautiful, so beautiful. There is so much to be gained out of so little, and each fragment is just absolutely a joy to read. This book felt like the changing of the seasons. It felt like everything was revolving around me. It felt like a little dip into everything that is worldly and changing, but still stagnant, because this was written thousands of years ago. And guys, I can't stop talking about this book and yelling at everyone about it. I just got so much out of this book. It gave me so much, and I gave it 5 stars, obviously. It was incredibly incredible. I tabbed so much of this book. I'm so happy that I got to read it this month, and oh my gosh. The first fragment, the first sentence is, "Deathless Aphrodite of the spangled mind, child of Zeus who twists lures, I beg you, do not break with hard pains, O lady, my heart. But come here, if ever before you caught my voice far off, and listening left your father's golden house, and came yoking your car." That is the first sentence of that. I absolutely loved it. Guys, read it. It takes no time at all. You can sit down and fly through it, but this is a book that I'm just going to hold in my heart for years and years and years, and it was amazing, amazing. Alright, and the last book I read in April, it's a play. It is Lady Windermeres Fan by Oscar Wilde. This is an extremely short, petite little play in 4 acts, I believe, and we're following Lady Windermere and her fan. This play deals with kind of that flip-floppy nature of women in the Victorian period. I absolutely adored this. I loved it. I got so much out of it as well. It was just a really, really great play. And just that fan, that image of that fan, I can't really get it out of my head, because it deals obviously with those 2 really just malignant but also so widespread ideals and kind of caricatures of women that existed in the Victorian period and that still pervade our culture today. Namely the angel of the house, or that kind of pure, graceful, wonderful, white hooded girl, and then obviously the devil, the witch, the fallen angel, the lady of the town, the lady of the night, whatever you want to call her. And it just really dealt using that image of a fan and using the image of Lady Windermere and the identities that aren't presented in here, but then are kind of thrust out in the open, and the reader and some people in this play realize who people really are. It was just really interesting how, like, identity really, like, for women at least in this play and in the period, just sits at kind of this top of a pin or on either side of a fan that is kind of fluttering so easily and flip-flops around so easily and so catastrophically depending on which side of the fan you are flipped to, and it was really, really interesting. So Oscar Wilde's writing was obviously wonderful, great. I love his witticisms as always. Sometimes it was a little bit much, because every single line I felt like it had to be something very poignant or something very absurd almost, or something, I don't know. I'm not complaining though, because this was still really, really awesome and I loved it. I gave it 4 stars, and it was a really great way to kind of close out the month. And it is a very short play. If it's your first time getting into Oscar Wilde, or if you just haven't gotten to this play of his yet, I would really recommend Lady Windermere's Fan. Yeah, in terms of plot, I don't think I really described that much, but it just deals with Lady Windermere's dealing with her relationship with her husband, Lord Windermere, with the kind of advances of this other gentleman, Lord Darlington, with the appearance of Mrs. Erline into her life, who is this character of really ambiguous identity, and just kind of the labels that we put on women, and just everything like that. So that is Lady Windermeres Fan, and that was the last book I read in April. Obviously, April was also the month for the Owl's Magical Readathon, which was just an absolute blast, hosted by G over at Book Roast. I did go for the career of Magizoologist, which I completed all of the prompts. I didn't get to those 2 kind of add-on things, but I wasn't really expecting to, so that's totally fine. But yeah, so those are the books that I read in April. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. Thank you for being here, and thank you for just being lights in my life, and hopefully in your own lives and everyone else's, and everywhere else you go, and all of the good things. I hope you are sparkling, and I hope you are happy, and I hope if it's raining you feel a little bit like you want to go dance in it or something like that. But yes, I will see you very, very soon. Ciao.